So let's move on to talk about more than 150 key private equity and venture capital stakeholders from around the world converged in London last week for the inaugural Sustainable Investing in Africa Summit. The conference, put together by the African Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, was focused on how to raise sustainable investing in frontier Africa. Tokunboh Ishmael is the co-founder and managing director at Alethea Capital, and she joins me now on the show to discuss the takeaways of the Africa Summit. Good evening, madam. Thanks for coming through tonight, and congrats on the summit you just concluded. Let me just go straight to my first question. Why was sustainable investing in Africa the choice of focus for this summit?
Well, there are many factors that are driving sustainability as a key focus. We all know what's going on around the world. If we just look at the macro war, inflation, food security challenges, social factors. And really, we felt that it was time to really push the envelope on discussing and bringing to the forefront that we can't continue to invest just for financial returns, but we need to invest in a manner that takes into consideration environmental, social, and governance factors so that we can think of these as opportunities to achieve superior returns and not just as challenges to face us.
So tell me about the hot topics in sustainable investing and its many facets.
Well, typically people tend to focus on the environmental side, which is certainly an area that we should all prioritize, but it's not the only one. There are also social factors that deal with how employees are being treated, communities are being treated when a business is operating, when investments are going into a business to develop goods and services all the way along the supply chain. So social factors, gender diversity, which is an area that my firm is prioritizing, and social factors in terms of the well-being of employees and producers in the value chain, particularly in Africa where farmers make up the largest proportion of employees and jobs on the continent, how you can think about their well-being when you're thinking about investing. Coming back to environmental challenges as well, like I said, that's a key area of priority. Unfortunately, in Africa, we've seen environmental as something as a challenge and a disadvantage for the continent because we're playing catch up on our productivity and we are the least emitter. But what we were talking about at the conference for sustainable investing was to think about environmental challenges or the environmental factors as opportunities, given that Africa will be the youngest population, will house the youngest population by 2050, given that we have the largest expanse of land for arable farming, given that we are positioned to help the world rethink supply chains for food and non-food items. We were thinking about how Africa can play a key role and leverage environmental factors as an opportunity for the continent to reach its potential.
Okay, so that's well put in terms of the various facets. So let's take it down a little bit. Let's talk about sustainable investing practices around African female-led businesses. What are the main takeaways that you want to share with us?
So for us, just even thinking about female founders, a social factor for us is that less than 2% of funds that are invested globally, not just in Africa, go to female founders. So if you invest that, 98% of funds invested into private companies and entrepreneurs is going to male founders. We want to shift the needle on that, and we intentionally look for diverse teams. And in fact, at the summit, a pledge that we've put out there and a challenge to everybody is that we need 50% of funds going to female and diverse founders by 2030. So that's really shifting from, less than 5% today, a factor by 10%, and saying 50% of that has to shift. Beyond that, if you look in the supply chains of our largest sector, particularly agribusiness, there's a preponderance of female founders and farmers who are small-scale holder farmers who tend to be women, and petty traders all along that value chain. And we want to see not just their well-being factored into businesses so that you raise their income or upskill them so that they can produce better, but also so that we can reduce wastage by ensuring that there's good manufacturing processing plants. We've invested in a few of those ourselves in Nigeria and in South Africa, and also ensure that in terms of the yields, the climate issues that small-scale farmers are facing. We're all talking about floods at the moment, how that's ravaging the country and the economy. The most vulnerable are the ones that are being impacted. And so we look at the value chains from the farms, from the factory floor, all the way up to the boardroom and ownership in the businesses to think about how can social factors help us invest better and achieve superior returns because we've considered these factors.
Okay, so but put together, are venture capital and private equity investors concerned really about sustainable investing on the continent? Do they really bother? Or they just want a return on investment?
Well, actually, globally, we've seen a shift. Alethea Capital, the firm that I run, we started talking about this in 2007, so over 15 years ago. And what we've seen in terms of the shift from 15 years ago to today is that there's been a groundswell or movement of people to begin to say it's not okay to just think about financial returns, and we need to think about social returns. When we started our Gender Smart Fund about 5 years ago, we were the only fund. The same time as the summit was going on in London this past week, there was a Gender Smart Fund. There were over 300 participants and various funds that have been set up at the Sustainable Summit for Africa. Also, we saw more funds who are saying we need to put this front and center, not just as a risk mitigant, because we need to think about it as a risk mitigant for climate adaptation and climate change, but also as opportunities for climate action, and also opportunities to ensure that social factors where employees are playing a key role in the production of goods and services, their well-being is being met and they're able to achieve superior returns for their companies, but also the consumers that require essential goods and services are able to access those in an affordable and efficient manner.
Okay, so let's begin to sum it up with you, madam. Who are the key partners that you're working with, that Africa is working with? What is the horizon you're looking at to increase the rate and volume of sustainable investments in Africa?
So just to take that last question first, like I said, at the summit, one of the challenges that we threw down to investors in the room was that we need 50% of funding going to diverse businesses, which overwhelmingly will mean that there needs to be a bit of a bias towards female founders by 2030. So an increase by a factor of 10. In terms of partners, traditionally and historically, it has been international development finance institutions. Indeed, with my firm, Alethea Capital, when we started in 2007, we only had international financial institutions, development finance institutions that invested in our funds and helped us to drive mandates around financial inclusion, energy inclusion, and affordable housing. Fast forward to 15 years later, we're seeing more African domestic investors. For example, the Bank of Industry in Nigeria, the Industrial Development Corporation out of South Africa, the African Development Bank. So we're seeing a more diverse group of investments coming from not just international, but on the African continent. But one thing I will say is we need to see more asset managers from the continent. to tilt, because if we look at domestic versus international, at the moment, overwhelmingly, it's about 10% domestic, about 90% international. So we need to see more pension fund money going into these investments, insurance on the continent as well.
Tokunboh Ishmael, co-founder and managing director at Alethea Capital. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on the summit just ended in London.